it's Jen from Kitchen Vixen and welcome to my kitchen. I'm going to be sharing some videos with you about how to make Springerle dough. Don't worry, it's not as intimidating as it might seem at first. Once you start, you'll be addicted, just like the rest of us. So the videos that we're going to do are going to focus on first making the dough, then pressing and cutting techniques so that you get the best results, and then drying. I'll show you when they're ready to be baked, and then we're gonna do some baking and then a little taste test afterwards. So maybe I'll teach you a little bit about painting them as well. So I hope you'll come along for the journey and join me in my kitchen making some Springerle cookies. Okay, so now we are ready to bake our dough. Some items that you'll need are 4 eggs. These are large size eggs. You will need the paddle and the whisk for your mixer. Or if you're using a hand mixer, you'll need the beaters and the dough hooks. And then I always use a scale to weigh my ingredients. And my recipe calls for, as you'll notice, I'll post the recipe down below. The recipe calls for 1 pound of the confectioner's sugar, powdered sugar, or icing sugar, depending on where you're from. And also 1 pound of cake flour. And then we use cake flour because it's a more finely ground flour, and then it picks up the details just a little bit better. So we use this. But you can use all-purpose flour without, it doesn't change the recipe too much. I just like a very perfect impression in the dough. And then some other items that you'll need, depending on what flavor, you can choose whatever flavor, but I'm going to do the original Kitchen Vixen recipe today, just to show y'all. So orange oil, we use a 1/4 teaspoon of orange oil. And this is anise oil, so we use a tablespoon of anise oil. If you're using extracts, you can do twice as much. The difference is just that they have added alcohol to them. And then also anise seed. If you're not crazy about anise seed, you can omit this step, but this is a traditional recipe, so I'm going to include it today, but feel free to leave it out. And then if you don't like anise, which many people do not, you can substitute that for any flavor of your choosing. So this is the base recipe. When I add in the flavors, feel free to change anything that you like. And that's about it. We're gonna go ahead and get started, so stay tuned. I've gone ahead and cracked the 3 eggs, 3 out of the 4 eggs, and then the last egg, the 4th egg, we are only going to use the whites, so I'm going to go ahead and separate those. Make sure that I don't put the 4th yolk in there. So many recipes don't require this, but this is kind of the secret to me getting a very white Springerle cookie. So we keep the yolk from 1, and so we have 3 full eggs and then 1 just the whites. So there we go. And then I'm going to put the whisk in and go ahead and whisk this for, it might take 5 to 10 minutes depending on where you live and the humidity level. Wow, thank you. So no takes in this, we're just doing this all in one take. So here we go. I'm going to turn it on. I apologize for the noise here, and what we're looking for is we are trying to get the dough, we're trying to get the whites to almost double in size and turn from a yellow to a very, very pale yellow, almost ivory color. So they're gonna be doubled in size and almost an ivory color. And you'll be able to see the tracks that the whisk makes once it gets thick enough, and that's how you'll know it's ready. So sometimes it could take 2 minutes, sometimes it can take 10 minutes. I've had it take more depending on how humid it is. Best to bake actually first thing early in the morning before the humidity of the day sets into the home. So here we go. Sorry for the noise. I'm going to start very low. And this is what we call waking up the eggs. It just kind of combines them a little bit before you start whipping. Gets them into a more homogeneous state. So I don't have the clear bowl, so you can't really see what's going on very well, but I will hold it up to you when it's ready to show you. Now, it's kind of all mixed in, so I'm going to go ahead and put it right on maximum. And I'm going to let this go ahead and whip up until it's ready, and then I'll show you when it's ready. So you don't have to sit here and wait for 10 minutes. So it's been about 7 or 8 minutes of whipping, and you can see that it's basically just about there. I'm sure you can see from here that the whites have gotten a lot more pale in color. They're almost an ivory color. I can see the tracks from the whisk. You might not be able to see it from your vantage point as the viewers here, but it definitely has whipped up quite a bit, and it's thick enough where you can see the whisk tracks. And when I turn it down, if I hold up the whisk, you'll be able to see it's kind of foamy. So let me do that now. Turn it down slowly. And there you can see kind of foamy, bubbly, thicker set of whites. So that's what we want right here. I'm going to go ahead and put this back in just for the flavoring. So first we're going to start with the orange oil. You can get this on my website, my Etsy shop, Kitchen Vixen molds. This is the orange oil. I'm going to do, it is quite potent, so I'm going to do a tablespoon. If I were doing extract, I would probably do a little more, maybe 2 tablespoons, but I like a nice strong orange flavor. If you don't like it quite as strong, you can go ahead and just half the amount. This is all to taste from this part. Basically just the dry ingredients and the eggs are what you need to be a little more exact on, but your flavorings, you can try the basic recipe, and if you like it a little more subtle or a little stronger, you can go ahead and adapt it to your own taste. And then this is the anise oil, again available on Kitchen Vixen molds Etsy shop. I'm going to go ahead and just put, this is very strong, so I'm going to put just a 1/4 teaspoon right here. Okay. If you like it stronger, by all means, add a little more. The only thing is, for me with anise or any florals, I like to go very easy on them because they can tend to be overpowering or even a little bit soapy. So we definitely want to calm down on those ones a little bit. And then I'm going to wait till I put in some of the flour before I do the anise seeds. So that'll just go to the side for a moment. And then I'm just going to whip this up real quick, just to incorporate the flavoring a little bit with the whisk. Now you'll notice that my recipe doesn't call for any leavening agent. There's no baking soda, baking powder, or hartshorn, which is a common ingredient that helps the cookies rise. So what makes them rise? Well, it's just the whipping of the eggs. The amount of air that you whipped in them in the beginning and right now is what's going to get them to rise up. So, and the lack of humidity. So we like to bake first thing in the morning. I bake at 5 or 6 in the morning before the humidity of the day sets into my kitchen. So now that this is all incorporated, I'm going to put it on the very lowest setting. And I'm going to put in our 1 pound of confectioner's sugar, powdered sugar, or icing sugar, depending on where you're from, what you call it. I'm from Canada, so we usually say icing sugar, but that could be a regional thing, I guess. So I'm just putting it in scoop by scoop until it all gets incorporated in. And I keep my mixer going. I don't like that shield, so I don't use it, but I do have a very narrow cup, you'll see, so I can get squeeze in there. And then for the last little bit, I just kind of tip it over the bowl, like so. A messy cook is a good cook. Okay, and then you won't be moving that. Just gonna turn this up a wee bit to get it all incorporated. We want to see all those little clumps. I didn't sift the powdered sugar, so just want to make sure that all the clumps get incorporated. If you want to sift, you can go ahead, but I don't find it's a necessary step for great cookies. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stop that. You will notice that there is some powdered sugar around the edge. I'm fine with that. I don't bother scooping it up and blending it in. So right at this point, we are going to take out our whisk and transfer to the paddle. And then I'm going to put it on very low again, and then start scooping in the powder, the flour, excuse me, cake flour. You want to go a little bit slower. Oh, you'll notice that she starts to slow down. She's chugging along here. You want to go a little slower with putting it in because the flour will poof back in your face. And again, I don't use the shield, so be careful when you're doing that you're not breathing in flour. Just add the rest of this. Okay. So at this point, I have just maybe less than a cup, quarter cup, or half a cup left of the flour. And I'm just making sure that the dough is the consistency that I want, because if it happens to seize up and get stiff right now, then I don't necessarily need to use the rest of the flour. So this is why we do this part second, and we just go scoop by scoop. However, it's very humid here today, I think at least 70% humidity in Georgia, so I do think I'm going to need all, and maybe even a little bit extra, but I'll show you how to check for consistency. Okay, so I've put in the pound of flour, and I'm going to mix it up. It's getting there, but it's still a bit more moist than I would like. And so let's talk about that for a moment. Here, just so you can see. Okay, so from here, you can see that it's getting that doughiness, but it's coming together, but it's still very droopy. It's falling off the paddle right now as it is. And if you touch it, it sticks to your finger. So that's not quite ready yet. So if you'll pardon me, I use Soft Silk or Swan's Down flour. Those are the ones that I can find in my local supermarkets. I'm not sure what y'all use, but I'm just gonna go maybe quarter of a cup at a time and add a little bit more just to accommodate for the humidity here. So I'm just gonna go ahead and put this back in, stir it up a little bit, and check for the consistency. So what you're looking for is, first of all, the paddle should pull the dough off the sides of the bowl by itself without you having to scrape it. That's one of the key ways to know that it's thick enough. And then also you're looking for the consistency of Play-Doh, and when you touch it, it will be smooth rather than sticky to your finger. So I'm going to go ahead, and in order for the ball to gather, the dough ball to gather, you will need to speed up the mixer just a little bit. So if a piece goes flying, just try to catch it. Okay, well you can see that the dough is now coming away from the bowl. It's gathering quite well. And if I lift it up, you can see it's almost all mixed together. So that's exactly what we want. And at this point, I'm going to add in the anise seed. And I like to do about a tablespoon. You might want to start off with a teaspoon in case you're not sure if you like the flavor or not, but I definitely like it. And I put it right into my dough. Some people sprinkle it on the sheet, the cookie sheet, and lay them on top, but I like a nice flat bottom. So again, it's my perfectionist tendencies here, but I'm gonna put that right in there, and I'm gonna mix it up for a little bit just to get those seeds incorporated. There we go. So it'll just stick to them and pick it up on its own and mix it all together. And then you're going to be kneading and rolling it as well, which will incorporate the seeds. So yeah, that works pretty quickly, and it looks like we're good to go. All right. And as you can see, it has picked up most of the dough. It's not sliding off, and well, my fingers are a little bit dirty, but from cookie dough, of course, not from dirt. There we go. So you can see that it's not sticking. If you kind of rub it a little bit, it becomes smooth. So that's the way that you can tell. And this is one fun part, listen carefully. If you thump it, it sounds hollow. So that's how much air that you've whipped into your eggs. So at this point, I'm just gonna go ahead and gather the dough. You will kind of have to, it's a bit stiff at this point, so you will kind of have to pick it apart from the batter. And because we didn't use hartshorn, which is ammonia, we can actually taste our dough. Now be careful, this is up to your own choice, because of course there is raw egg and flour in here, but it's never killed me yet. Perfect flavor. I love it. Okay, now I'm just gonna go ahead and gather the rest of this together, and I'll show you how to wrap it up. Okay, so I have gathered all the dough together, and what I'm kind of doing now is just pressing it. I'm not really kneading it per se, but I'm just pressing it down onto the countertop just to make sure that I get all of the cracks out, because you want a nice smooth ball of dough. You don't want dry cracks. And then also the dough does tend to dry out very quickly while you're working with it. So I would suggest breaking it up into 2 or 3 portions. So I like to kind of just pinch it in half and roll a couple of different balls with it, so that I am only working with half of my recipe at a time. So I'll roll this one, kind of roll it between my hands here, roll it, press it against the counter, just kind of push the air and cracks to get a nice smooth ball. So I'll show you that a little closer. Okay, you got a nice smooth ball of dough here, and it's the consistency of Play-Doh, a heavy Play-Doh, but Play-Doh nonetheless. And then what you want to do is you want to wrap it up as soon as possible and not let it sit out too long, because it does dry out very quickly on the outside. So I like to set it down on my plastic wrap, and then make sure you can see, fold it over, and then kind of like hug it with my hands to make sure that no air is getting in here. And then cut it off and kind of do the same thing, and then just fold it over. You want to make sure that absolutely no air gets in here while it's resting. So I'm going to do that for the first one, and then also for the second dough ball, because I did split it up into 2. So I find this kind of helps it. The warmth from your hands kind of helps it as well, unless you tend to have cold hands. So that'll help it as well. You've been working this long, I'm sure your hands are warm by now. All right, and then we're going to set it down, fold this over, give it a little hug so it's snug. Didn't mean to rhyme there. Okay, and then do it again, fold it underneath, and make sure it's airtight. Okay, so you have 2 dough balls, and you're gonna let these rest for about half an hour to an hour before you can start working on them. So there you go, you've made your Springerle dough. For about an hour. If it sits a little longer, that's fine. But we are ready to work on this and roll it out. Press, cut, and make the pretty part. So this is the exciting part, you guys. So I'm just going to show you what you need for pressing and cutting your cookies. So of course, you need a rolling pin, a sheet pan that I have lined with parchment paper. You'll need a pastry brush to brush your molds, something to lift your cookies. So this is a cookie spatula. You can also use like a pastry scraper as well. or even like a pie lifter if you don't have a cookie spatula. And you need a mold and possibly some cutters depending on what mold you choose. Now this mold is our new rose window mold that everyone's been talking about. And then whatever cutters that you need. So these are the cutters that come with the rose window mold that is also on our Etsy shop, Kitchen Vixen molds. And this is called Rose Window KV2115. And so it comes with the cutters and the mold, okay? And then also, this is what I like to call magic dust. And you might have heard a few people mention this. And this is what I like to dust my molds with. A lot of people just use flour, but I like to do, to make my magic dust, and I'm gonna show you how to do it right now because this gives the best release plus flavor that you can for having the molds not stick, the dough not stick into your molds, excuse me. So this is pretty simple. It is just 1 part confectioner's sugar, powdered sugar or icing sugar, whatever you like to call it. 1 cup or 1 part of the flour that you use. So the baking flour, the cake flour, excuse me. And the last is 1 part of the cornstarch. So those 3 things combined, now you can just do half cup, half cup, half cup, but it's just 1 to 1 to 1 ratio, okay? So then I just take a whisk, and I don't need to sift it. I just kind of like whisk and mix it up a little bit just to get it kind of all incorporated. And that's what I use to dust my molds so that the dough doesn't stick into the mold. So I'm unwrapping my dough. And you'll notice that the outside does have become a little bit more dry, and that's okay. I'll show you how to work with it. But at this time, if you work really, really fast, you can work with about half of a batch at one time. However, we're going slow, so I'm going to cut this in half again, and I'm going to wrap up some of your dough and keep it nicely tightly wrapped so that it doesn't dry out, okay? And then just set it to the side because the dough that we're working with is going to take a little bit of time, and then we don't want everything to dry out. So at this point, you remember I showed you that the dough is like nice and smooth. Well, at this point, you know, you have cracks, you split it open to cut them in half, and it's a little bit dry on the outside. And you don't want to start working with this and rolling it right away because it's dry on the outside but moist on the inside. And so then that's going to give you cracks, which means your cookies are going to split open. That's mainly what happens. So what I want you to do is knead this a little bit first, and that is going to bring the moisture from the inside to the outside and make it all one homogeneous glop again. So how do I do that? Well, okay, you can start by squishing it a little bit. That's fine. But I like to hold down part of the dough and take the heel of my hand and just kind of drag it. So what you're going to see are these kind of lines breaking up in here, and then fold it, press into a kind of a loose ball again, and then do the same thing, drag it so that you're seeing those lines. Okay, bring it back together. And every time that you do this, you are bringing the moisture from the inside back to the outside. So you just need to do that maybe 2 or 3 times depending on how much dough you're working with. And then again, I'm kind of like beating it against the counter to smooth it, rolling it, and I'm just trying to get it all moist again. And so you'll see that all the cracks are gone, and you now have a smooth, moist ball again to work with. Okay, so at this point, it's all nice and moist again and very, very smooth. You can see on the outside, you can feel very smooth. So we know it's nice and ready. Now I'm going to take, I don't like to roll right onto the marble or whatever countertop you have because that tends to make it stick. So I like, and then this is easier to lift off and transfer to your baking tray. So I like to put a piece of parchment under where I'm rolling, and then I'll use a little bit of your magic dust. And I just kind of spread it around. And I put it a little bit on the outside of my ball of dough. And then this is where you roll it out. I like to roll out to, if I'm using a very deep mold, I like to roll out to about 1/2 inch. By the time you press it down, it's going to get smaller anyway, but I roll about to 1/2 inch. If I'm using, you know, a shallow mold, then it could be, you know, 3/8 or whatever. But I'm going to turn it. You'll notice I'm not using the handles because that tends to go like this, and then you won't get an even press. So I just let the pin work for itself, and I just use my hands to lightly roll it back and forth. Okay, so that is a pretty good, I just go side to side. That's pretty good. So I can kind of feel, a lot of people use dough guides. I just have been doing this so long, I can kind of feel how thick the dough is, but maybe I'll hold it up and show y'all. This is probably about 3/8 that I went for all around. Okay, so now I'm gonna take my, excuse me, I'm gonna take my mold first. It's a slippery one. And dip in my magic dust. And then I'm going to just kind of stipple. If you've ever done painting, stenciling, stipple. So just pressing some of the magic dust inside the mold. You can kind of spread it around. And then the last step is to turn it over and kind of tap the side. That takes all the extra out, so it looks kind of like this. Okay. Then I'm going to take a little bit of my magic dust because this is my first press and I don't want anything to stick inside. So I'm going to take my magic dust and just dust the top of the dough a little bit. Okay, and then I'm going to get ready to press. So I'm going to go ahead, and I don't work right at the edge because you'll notice that the edges tend to be thinner than the center. So I work somewhat into the center a little bit just to make sure that my cookie is very even. That way it rises evenly when it bakes. So at this point I'm going to press it, and I want to make sure that when I press it, I'm pressing everywhere evenly. So I'll go down flat with my hand, and I like to kind of push with 2 hands to help. And then I'm going to make sure that I get all the edges. So I'm going to press, when I press the bottom edge, I'm going to also press the top edge, and then the sides together. We want to make sure that we're not tilting the mold at all, that it stays flat, but you're still getting an impression. Okay, so I'll make sure that this is all pressed, and then I kind of wiggle it a little bit as I'm pulling up to make sure that it comes out and gets a nice release. And so there you go. So there's your image. It's a little hard to see, so I'm gonna hold it up for you. All right. There you go. I don't have a cameraman. I'm just doing this all by myself. Well, there you go. There's the rose window. Beautifully pressed. Okay. So now after we press, it's not like a regular cookie cutter where you press and then you go ahead and press another one, because once you press the second one, the dough is going to squish, and then your first one is going to get distorted. Now we're going to cut first before we press another one so we don't distort the image by pressing 2 next to each other. So I'll just take the cutter that was specially made for this and place it around, and then I'm going to push down, and then I like to give it kind of a side-to-side wiggle, just ever so slightly, just to make sure that I can feel the dough pulling away from the parchment paper, and that means that I've got a nice clean cut and I won't get those little shreds that sometimes you get at the edges of your cookies. You want a nice clean cut. So then I'll lift this up, and then rather than trying to take the cut piece out, I like to move the dough just to make sure that I don't disturb the cookie itself. I'll move the dough instead of moving the cookie. And then just kind of ever so slightly lift that onto the cookie spatula. And then there you have a perfectly cut cookie. So I'll set it onto my tray here. And then sometimes if you cut them thin, you'll notice that you might have distorted your circle a little bit. So then what I'll do is I'll take the outer cutter again, and I'll just kind of give it a shake just to make sure I have that circle perfect again while it's sitting on the tray. Anytime that you transfer something, you might warp or distort it. Now, after you've cut out and you have some scraps of dough left, you've noticed that they've gotten kind of crusty and dry around the edges, and this is the point where many people say, I can't work with this anymore, it's only good on the first press, that kind of thing. So I'm going to show you the same thing that I showed you when we first took it out of the plastic wrap, and that is that you just got to knead it a little bit more. So I'm going to press it kind of all on itself to push it together. Then I'm going to use the heel of my hand again and spread it out so that you see it pulled apart from each other, and then roll it back in on itself. And just do this a couple times. There we go again. Okay. And then bring it back into a ball. Roll it on itself. And then we have a smooth ball to work from once again. And this is left over from all of the cuttings that you did. And it's nice and moist and ready to work with again. Occasionally, this one didn't do it, but occasionally your dough, especially if you roll it really thick, it'll get stuck inside the cutter once you lift it up. Now to release it, I like to take the heel of my hand that's holding the cutter with the dough inside against my other heel of my hand, position it over so that it'll drop in my hand, and then just kind of give it a shake, and it'll sort of just fall into your hand. And so that usually happens when you roll quite thick. But this one didn't, so I'm going to go ahead and pick it up and show you the beautiful Gothic window cookie. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and set that down. And then with this dough that's left, you can see it's kind of getting dry. So of course, just like I showed you before, I like to brush off the extra flour from my hands. Squish it together. And then this does feel like the more that you use it and you add more flour when you're putting your magic dust on, it does feel like, now again, we're gonna stretch it here. It does feel much more dry. And so if you like the consistency and the ease of use when it's more moist, then you can go ahead and take some of the dough from the previous dough ball that you had wrapped up, and then just take a piece of it and incorporate it back into your dough. So you have some fresh moist dough and then some of the older dough. Okay, and make sure you wrap it back up well so it doesn't dry out. So you'll have the fresh dough and the dough that you've been rolling. Now you just kind of add it, so it'll just kind of give it a little of that extra kick of moisture to help you roll. But again, you can just keep kneading it until it's got that smooth, until you feel all the moisture back. And then you're just going to re-roll again so that you can do more prints. Just wanted to show you a little closer up. So here's the rose window, and I'm planning to paint the insides of these in just a little bit, and I'll show you how that's done. These have to air dry. So this is something different about these cookies. They have to air dry. Depending on where you live and how humid it is, they have to air dry for, I would say, maybe 4 to 6 hours if it's not humid at all. I live in Savannah, Georgia, and it's anywhere from 12 to 24 hours. So you just leave them on the parchment, flat with a little room to breathe. And then I would put like sizes with each other. So if you have a bunch of smaller molds that you've done, I would put those on one tray and bake them separately from the larger ones. But I just have these ones right here that I've shown you. And so the ones that I've used are the rose window, the Gothic window. I've used this little church or cathedral. This is number 4604 by Anis Paradis. And then the cutter is also made by us, Kitchen Vixen. And another one of our molds, this is called He is Risen. One that we had for Easter. He is Risen, this is number KV 2105. Okay, so those are the 4 that I've used, and I'm planning to paint these with some luster dust and alcohol shortly, so you'll be able to see them after baked and then after painted as well. So quite a lot of steps to the process of these cookies, but they are well worth the wait. I'll let you take a closer look before I sign off here. So these are going to be set to dry. You can just leave them on the countertop and then come and check on them. And what you're looking for is a dry ring around the perimeter that's going to be about 1/4 of an inch. So they're going to dry from the outside in. You don't want them to dry completely on the backs, but you do want the fronts to dry completely because that is exactly how they're going to keep their crisp image. So you're looking for 1/4 inch, 1/8 to 1/4 inch of a dry ring around the edge, and that's when they're ready to bake. So keep checking out. Now our cookies have dried for about 10 hours and they look pretty good to me. Remember I said that you are looking for about 1/8 to 1/4 inch of a dry ring around the edge of the bottom. So I'm going to hold one up so you can see. Do you see how it's lighter all around the edge of the cookie? That means it's ready to bake, okay? And so the reason that is important is because the moist spot and the dry spot, where they meet, that is where the air is going to escape. So they're going to rise where the moist spot is, and then the air is going to escape in a crack all the way around where the dry meets the moist. And that is important because if you don't have that, then the air will escape through the front of the cookie and then you're going to get cracks and it's going to distort your image. So it's very important that you have that dry meets moist spot on the back of the cookie. So again, about 1/8 to 1/4 inch dry ring. You can see that there. And then you'll notice that the design of the cookie has come out a lot more since it has dried. So look at that, look at the definition on that. Isn't that amazing? Really cool. So I can't wait to see these bake and how much they rise from the eggs that we had whipped. So I'm just gonna put them in the oven. I have the oven preset to 300 degrees. That is the sweet spot in my kitchen. You might find you have to go a little bit lower, but don't go any higher than 300 degrees Fahrenheit. And I'm gonna put them in for this, they're quite large cookies, so I'm gonna put them in for about 19 to 20 minutes. But I am gonna just watch and see how much they rise, and that'll tell me how long that they need to be in for total. But the sweet spot's usually somewhere between 18 to 20 minutes on a cookie that's not bigger than your hand. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and put those in. And one last thing I wanna mention is that they have to go in on the bottom rack of your oven. And that is because you want them to cook from the bottom and not have any darkening on the top. You want them to stay that nice white porcelain color. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and put them in on the bottom rack. There we go. I'm so excited to see those bake. Okay, now I've let the cookies cool completely. That's because if you try to pull them off too early, they'll stick to the parchment and they'll pull off some of the back. So I've let them cool completely, and ta-da, this is what they look like. Check it out. So you can see they've risen a little bit, and the dry ring that I was talking to you about, you can see where it's cracked. all along there. Sorry, it's out of focus. There we go. It is cracked all along where the dry ring meets the wet. That means that anything that's dry was not disturbed, so the image has kept perfectly. Okay, and then we're going to go ahead and break one open so you can see. Well, I'm going to go ahead. So I'm going to take the little church because it has a nice rise. They call it a foot, kind of like on a macaron where they have the little part that rises and fluffs out as a foot. Well, this part kind of goes in and rises, and that's the foot of the Springerle cookie. Okay, so how to test if your Springerle is perfectly done? Well, you should have some ever so slightly golden brown on the bottom, and then they may rise more than this, but I didn't bake these first thing in the morning, so there's humidity here, so that does have an effect on it. And also the longer that you whip your eggs, that'll help with more rise as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and break it open. Ooh, look at that. Okay, so you'll notice it has a nice little, let's get it in focus, there we go, an eggshell crust on the top, and then a dense cake-like texture inside. So it's gonna be a little bit chewy, kind of like a brownie, like a dense brownie, but there we go. You can see. Okay, so let me go ahead and have a bite. So good.